The objectives of the session are basically to explain the historical background of infectious diseases. So this one is basically for your information. Whilst it's for your information, it's also for you to understand that human behavior is, as human beings, we tend to forget things that we learn over time. And most of the things that are happening now have been happening um, around the 18th century. We also want to discuss the principles of infectious diseases occurrence, discuss the control and prevention of infectious disease control under programmatic conditions, and describe the current advances in communicable disease control. So historically, I think the people like Robert Koch and others who I have not mentioned uh, cannot be left out when we discuss communicable diseases. He was the first to describe the principle of infectious diseases. Let me just write. Disease causation. Subsequent scientists describe the dynamics of infectious disease in terms of environment, host, and agent. And basically, they were trying to say for an infectious disease to successfully transmit from person to person, there's an interaction between the environment, between the host being the human being, and the agent being the infecting organism. Okay. Who can tell me an example of a disease that is modified by an infectious disease that is modified by environment? Is there anyone raising a hand?
There is no one.
Okay, so we'll continue and then I'll ask the same question later on. Okay, so infectious diseases are not really new. Yes, people talk about Robert Koch. They talk about who is the other guy, Richard, the anesthetist from England, who described the principles of cholera epidemic.
I think it's the John Snow. I think the
John Snow,
yeah.
exactly. Okay, as the fathers of public health. But I think if you read, for those who read the Bible, if you follow through the journey of Jews from Egypt to the Promised Land, Moses used to tell the people that they must practice personal hygiene by washing and keeping clean, bury waste materials away from the campsites, like using the cat method. For those who know how cats dispose of their excreta, isolate those who were sick, burn soil dressings, and he prohibited from eating animals that had died of natural causes. So this is Moses. If we have to describe a father of public health, I think Moses is probably the first person to describe the basic principles of infectious disease prevention and control. Um, uh, During the Middle Ages, I think most of the knowledge about sanitation and public health was lost. So for people who did history at all level like me, they will know what the Middle Ages were like. And there was general stagnation of culture for almost 1,000 years. And the Middle Ages were characterized, I'm sorry about these pictures, but just to illustrate um, what people were doing. So to my left, which is probably to my left, is a gentleman who's just yelping himself through the window. And then to my right is someone who is throwing a bucket full of feces onto the streets. You may say this is outrageous, the bucket system, but for some settlements in Cape Town, they are still using the bucket system if you follow the news. So from the Middle Ages, we went on to the Renaissance period around the mid 1800s, where there was a lot of overcrowding, filthy environments with garbage and dead animals, sick people. This is the period of industrialization in Europe. And remember, I'm not sure which history you did, but during that period, there were a lot of diseases, outbreaks in Europe, cholera, plague. This is the time that John Snow described the cholera epidemic in London and removed a pump that was implicated in the transmission um, of cholera in London around the 1800s, 1840 or 1855. A lot of people believe that diseases were caused by the curse of gods, and there were prophets during that time who actually made brisk business. So this issue of prophets did not start today. I apologize for those who strongly believe in them, um, but this did not start now. It's something that happened when there were outbreaks in Europe. So this is so it was 1854. John Snow proved that cholera was waterborne, was transmitted through water, the drinking of contaminated water. If you read textbooks of epidemiology now, people say John Snow is the father of modern epidemiology. But like I said, I think there were people who practice public health way before John Snow. And then for those who have got a lab background, you probably know about a gentleman called Louis Pasteur, who is described as the father of microbiology, who came up with the germ theory, where he says he disproved the theory of spontaneous generation that had been postulated in 1861, and contributed to the current understanding of fermentation, developed the techniques for selective destruction of microorganisms using pasteurization, in other words, boiling food, boiling water before you use it. And in 1881, the fixed attenuated vaccine for cholera was developed, and then immunization against rabies in 1885. So Louis Pasteur actually contributed significantly to the understanding of infectious diseases, and led to then a flurry of research by different scientists. So there were several other infectious diseases, I think, that took place. Anyone who know about the syphilis experiment in the US? Can you raise your hands?
Yes, say I do.
Yes, can you tell us about that?
The syphilis experiment was conducted in Tuskegee over a period of years, where it was done on people of Black race, and the study was denied the participants the rightful treatment to syphilis because they wanted to see how the disease would progress and what the outcomes would be if no treatment was offered. And it then came to light upon which it was considered unethical, because a lot of those people actually suffered irreversible harm, and some of them died in the process.
Excellent. So they are commonly referred to as the Tuskegee experiments. And then in Zimbabwe, anyone who knows about the schistosomiasis experiment? Then it was in Rhodesia, but I think the study ended sometime around 1985, 85, 86, about. Even during independence, the study was continued. Who can remember the schistosomiasis studies in Zimbabwe?
I see Lloyd, your hand is up. Latricia, your hand is up. You want to say something, you can unmute yourself. And Munyaradzi Mubango, ndizo. Munyaraz, do you want to say something? I see your hand is up. You can unmute yourself and maybe you can continue, Dr. Chilend. I think there's no one.
Okay. So schistosomiasis experiments were similar to the Tuskegee experiments. So people were intentionally infected with bilharzia and were left untreated until they died. If you read the historical books on schistosomiasis, you will know that Zimbabwe and Egypt published a lot of, then it was Rhodesia, published a lot of papers on schistosomiasis and contributed a lot to the current knowledge of on schistosomiasis that we know. So it was not only in the US, but it also happened in Rhodesia. And then the study, I think the last participant died of his bilharzia in 1986, 87, thereabout. There were other studies on malaria. People were injecting themselves with malaria to see what would happen. So I think it's important to remember about these unethical studies. We may ask you in an exam, what are the 4 principles of infectious diseases causation as described by Robert Koch? We may also ask you about the chain of infection. I know you did the chain of infection when you were doing epidemiology, or that time you were calling the epidemiological triangle. Okay. And what is the public health importance of the chain of infection? So these are questions that may come in your paper 2, I think, of MPH. I'm going to jump these slides because I think you can check from any public on the USET library what viruses are, what bacteria are. They are important to know. We will ask you, the fact that I'm jumping does not mean it's not important. It just means that we need to go to the next session. So what really are communicable diseases? So it mainly refers to infectious diseases. Remember, I'm saying mainly refers to. This answers the question on us last on Monday about malnutrition, about cervical cancer. That mainly they are infectious diseases with a potential to spread from person to person. They may occur in endemic, epidemic, and pandemic. So this is revision. Can someone tell me what endemic means? If no one can tell me, I'll ask Shimanga to come back and redo the lecture. I'll tell him that your class does not remember what endemic, epidemic, and pandemic is. Okay, good. Oh, okay. Someone wants to say something.
We have Linda and
Mukudze. Right. Can one of you tell me what endemic is and the other tell me what epidemic is?
Unmute yourself and
maybe you can unmute them,
Mukudze, you can go ahead.
Okay, endemic is a disease or a condition that is regularly found among people in a certain area.
What do you mean regularly?
Like that is almost always there in a given area.
All right, so it's almost always there at that given threshold, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because then if it exceeds the threshold, the non-threshold, it changes to something else, right? Can you tell me about pandemic? Because I've already explained the epidemic by talking about thresholds. Who was the other person, Makrumis?
Sorry, the other person was me. So a pandemic is when a disease affects people beyond a limited local geographic area where it surpasses.
Okay, we have a connection problem. So I think the classical definition of pandemic is where it involves more than one continent, where the effects of infectious disease go beyond more than one continent. It then becomes a pandemic, like COVID-19 at the moment. Okay, so in terms of definitions, infection is successful replication of organism in the tissue of a host. This you must have done when you're doing your outbreak investigation, the case study on disease of unknown origin. Must have covered that. Is that correct? Okay. I will continue, but I'll be very fast. Subclinical infection is the when there's successful transmission and there's an immune response to that infection, but there are no overt clinical manifestations. Who wants to give an example of that? A common disease that occurs in subclinical form. Are there medical officers in this group or nurses? Memory. Richard, can you unmute memory so that Are you saying something, memory? Unmute yourself.
Yes. I said maybe I can give an example of tuberculosis where someone can have the infection but does not show any clinical signs or symptoms.
Okay. Can you give me another example that affects children?
I'm still thinking maybe someone can take over.
Okay. So, is it polio? Does polio occur in subclinical form or measles? When you were doing your lecture on screening, I think you must have covered this subject. Dr. Makrumize, you used your Gmail account for this meeting. I think we've lost Dr. Makrumize.
I used my Belgium account. I thought maybe but I realized it has a limit. I'm not sure what's happening. Maybe.
All right. But last week we didn't have a problem like this, isn't it?
Maybe it's the issue of co-hosting. I'm not sure now.
Oh, are we co-hosting? I'm co-hosting with you.
Yes.
Oh, really?
I just I enabled the co-host together with Dr. Takata. I think
Yeah. So maybe you may want to.
Or to withdraw.
Telling us it's going to cut to. Okay, so we'll continue. If it drops, maybe you may just want to.
Yeah, just click the same link.
Oh, just click the same link.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you okay, and then colonization just means presence of microorganisms on a body surface without tissue invasion or immune response. Someone to give an example of colonization? Can someone give me an example of colonization? There's no one who knows what colonization.
Can you unmute yourself, Tebukani, and give the response? There's also Kudzai.
Okay, I wanted to say there are some enterobacteria that are not pathogenic. For example, some species of E. coli.
Okay. All right. So the other colleague wanted to say something?
Wanted to say something. I think it was only Tebukani, and there's no one wanted to.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So another is a staph aureus on our hands and skin. There is a lot of staph aureus, Staphylococcus aureus. If you take a swab of your hands and skin and culture on agar, blood agar, there's a lot. Staph aureus will grow, but it doesn't cause disease. And then pathogenicity is number with disease over infected. So it basically means what is the ability of microorganisms to induce disease. I'll give an example where if 10 people are infected with HIV, how many will show disease within the given incubation period, as opposed to if 10 people are infected with Ebola, how many people will show disease? So Ebola is thought to be highly pathogenic compared to HIV, because most people with HIV will only show disease later on. Whereas with Ebola, you get infected, or more than 90% of people will show disease. So Ebola becomes a more pathogenic disease. Infectiousness, number infected divided by number of susceptible. So with infectiousness, we are saying if 10 people are exposed to Ebola, 10 people are exposed to measles, how many of those people who have been exposed to an infectious organism will successfully be infected? In other words, will show immunological response, etc., etc. So a disease that is easily transmissible, or that when exposed to, you are more likely to be infected, is thought to be highly infectious. Most infectious diseases are highly infectious. For your information, HIV is not highly infectious. Ebola is both pathogenic and highly infectious. Measles is highly infectious but less pathogenic, because most children are exposed to measles and are infected. Disease. And then latent period is the interval between exposure to physical chemical agent and onset of disease. So this one, latent period, refers to non-communicable diseases. Reservoir is location where the infectious agent maintains its presence, metabolizes, and replicates. For example, who wants to give an example of a reservoir of infectious disease? No one is raising a hand. Okay. I said I'd promised to rattle through this presentation, so okay. I think port of entry have done that, route of transmission have done that. Host susceptibility, you may have done that, but it's basically described. So the host susceptibility basically describes those characteristics that make a person more likely to get and to be infected with a disease. So issues like age, sex, most EPI diseases okay in children than adults. General health, immune status, cultural and other behaviors like sexual behaviors for HIV transmission. So those factors that predispose a person to successful infection. So what are some of the risk factors for communicable diseases? I think it's probably the issue of hosts, environment, and agent. So general poverty and ill health, people in defined situations, civil strife, destruction of infrastructure due to wars, lack of security, climate change. A potential question is select 4 risk factors for communicable disease transmission and describe the mechanism. So what I'm implying here is that the list here is just a list. You are supposed to understand how each of these risk factors contribute to successful transmission of disease. So you must go and read about on them, because there's a potential question that may come in your exam. So you need to know how lack of security actually facilitates transmission of disease. You need to know how climate change facilitates transmission of disease. It's not described, I think, in this presentation, but the expectation is that you must go and read. And definition of disease is that overt clinical manifestation of infection. And it's a result of the harmful interaction between the host, man, the pathogenic agent, and the environment.
Sorry, Dr. Shirenda, I think yes. It's going to, it can terminate anytime. I need to send a new link. If we just click the other link.
Okay, all right.
I don't know what happened.
Yeah, okay. So, all right. I'll stop from here and then we can continue. Yeah, stop it.